Late and we'll start.
Okay. Sure.
Today's October 18th in the year 2011. I'm Karen Herman with the Archive of American Television. It is my great pleasure today to be interviewing Al Roker at NBC headquarters in New York City.
Global headquarters.
So we're going to start right from the top. And our first question is, what was your name at birth?
Albert Lincoln Roker, Jr.
And when were you born?
August 20th, 1954.
And where?
In New York City. I think it was in Brooklyn, Kings County.
Is that where you grew up?
Back and forth. I think after I was born, we lived for a while in my grandmother's house in Ozone Park, South Ozone Park, Queens. Then my parents got an apartment in Rockaway in Queens. We lived there for a few years. Then they got an apartment in it was a projects, and then an apartment in the projects in Canarsie, Brooklyn, and I lived there till I was in third grade. Then we moved. My parents actually bought a house, scraped up money for a down payment, $200, and bought a semi-attached house in St. Albans, Queens. And we moved there. I went to PS 136 for a year, and then transferred to St. Catherine of Siena for my fifth grade, and that's where I graduated from. And then I went to Xavier High School here in Manhattan, and then graduated in '72, and then went to SUNY Oswego.
Tell me a little bit about your parents.
My dad was a bus driver when I was growing up. He was a pretty good artist. Couldn't get a job in the Commercial Artists Union because at that time, they weren't hiring African Americans. So he had to put food on the table. So he got a job as a bus driver. My mom, both of them graduated high school. My mom was like a housewife and a nurse's assistant for a while. Then when as kids came along, it was just made more sense for her to stay home. And they were, both, kind of middle class, hardworking, folks who wanted more for their kids, wanted their kids to go to college, and the American dream.
What traits do you think you inherited from them?
I think from my mother, I got kind of a slightly twisted sense of humor. She would, my friends would come over and she'd speak this like gibberish, like she was speaking a foreign language, and they were like, what is she doing? Your mother's kind of strange. Yeah, I know. And from my dad, I think I got the work ethic. He was always a hard worker, worked a couple of jobs, besides what he was doing as a bus driver, plus he would do double shifts and, he'd do whatever it took to put food on the table. So I think, I kind of got the best of both of them.
Were you very cognizant of, living in the projects and all that? Were you very cognizant of?
No, it was just where you lived. I mean, it wasn't like they were these horrible places. That was especially back in the 50s and the early 60s. They were they were clean. They were somewhat integrated. I mean, there were more whites than blacks at that point living in there, but it wasn't like you felt stigmatized that you were living in the projects, but still, my folks wanted to get a house. That was part of the dream. But in the meantime, it wasn't because all your friends were living there too, so it wasn't like you were in this prison by yourself. You were surrounded by friends, and some of your family members lived there too. So no, it wasn't like, oh God, I'm in the projects.
What kind of kid were you?
I was a shy kid. I wasn't very athletic. I was a chubby kid. But I always, at an early age, I think I escaped through television. I liked television. When I was 10, I had figured out if you got the back of the TV set off, and I was always interested kind of in multimedia. And of course, it wasn't that called that then. But my dad had brought home from the depot there were a number of things that would fall off the back of a truck at the depot. One was a 3M woolen sack reel-to-reel tape recorder, and so you could record stuff. But I just I would read stuff, read up on stuff, and I remember I got a book out of our school library about audio, and we had a very eclectic school library, and I figured out that if you ran wire from the speaker leads at the back of the if you took the back of the TV set off. Now, of course, I could have been electrocuted, but I ran the wire from the speaker leads into the line in of the tape recorder, and realized I could record soundtracks of my favorite shows. And so I would, drive my mother crazy. Mom, listen to this episode of Batman, and she's like, oh, God. And then when I was about 12, I kind of got into splicing tape. And, there was a place up on, off of Merrick Boulevard in Queens called Lafayette Radio. It was kind of the precursor to Radio Shack. It was a big mail order radio and amateur radio and audio enthusiast catalog. You could buy everything from turntables to audio equipment, all this stuff. So I remember I would go there on the weekends. I mowed lawns to get extra money, and I would buy like audio equipment, like a splicing block and editing tape, and I loved it.
Oh, you mentioned you watched a lot of TV. What were your favorite shows?
Oh gosh, I mean, growing up in New York City was like, for live TV or kids television especially was, like a treasure trove. I mean, I watched Sandy Becker and Chuck McCann, Sonny Fox, Soupy Sales. I mean, you saw all these shows, and you were like in heaven because you had these great kid show hosts, Officer Joe Bolton with the Three Stooges, Zachary. It was great. So there were those shows, and then there were the cartoons, obviously, Deputy Dog and Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse and Casper the Ghost and all these kind of shows, and then in the evening there was Rango and F Troop, and I tended to really like sitcoms more, so Secret Life of Henry Fife, The Phyllis Diller Show, you name it, Julia, The Cosby Show, the original, the first Bill Cosby show. When he was Chet Kincaid, the gym teacher. So you go. I mean, I watched TV. I liked TV.
Did you ever watch the Today Show?
It's funny, but not really, because when you're a kid, you're kind of watching. My parents didn't really. My dad was gone, out of the house, and my mom is trying to get 6 kids out of the house for school. So, although not all at once, but because we were. My baby brother is 17 years younger than me, but she's trying to get a passel of kids out. So, the best way to do that is to kind of, as each one gets ready, let them sit in front of the TV. So, and when you're 7 and 8 years old, you're not watching the Today Show. So, it was whatever cartoons were on Channel 9 or Channel 5 or Channel 11. So, no, I didn't really start watching the Today Show until maybe college. Because, again, I had to take a bus and a subway to get to high school, so I was out the door before the Today Show started. So it wasn't really until college, and you'd have an early class, but there was like a student lounge, and the Today Show would be on. So you'd catch a little bit of the Today Show before you went into class.
Did you have any idea what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I didn't want to be on TV. My dream job would have been to be an animator. I loved animation. I still do. But I knew that I was going to be a producer or a director. I had no interest in being on TV. So I haven't really achieved anything that I planned to, which is a little depressing.
Were you a good artist?
Yeah, I was a good cartoonist. My dad was a good artist. I'm a good cartoonist, or decent cartoonist. But I'll never know if I really am or not, because I love doing it as a hobby, I never had to do it as a job, so the jury's still out on that one.
So let's talk about, you mentioned that you went to SUNY.
Yes.
Talk about how that led to your career.
Well, I got a job. I couldn't afford to go to Syracuse University. I could go to a state school, but I wanted to do film. I couldn't go to NYU, couldn't afford that, nor did I probably have the grades for it. It's not like I don't think they were going to say, oh, we want you so badly. And I went through the state university catalog, and nobody had a film at the time, a film program, but SUNY Oswego had a radio and TV department, and I thought, well, they show films on TV, and somebody's got to direct TV, so this is probably not a bad gig. So I applied, and they met my stringent requirements. They accepted me, and I went there sight unseen. I mean, I didn't go see the school. I just boom. And growing up in Queens and in Brooklyn, you're used to large bodies of water being oceans. You think of a lake, you can see the other side. There are no waves. And then you get to Lake Ontario, and you go, this is an ocean. This isn't a lake. There are waves lapping up on the shore. I can't see the other side. There are tankers out on the horizon. This is not a lake as I know it. But anyway, I took a number of classes. But toward the end of my sophomore year, my department chairman, Lou O'Donnell, Dr. Louis B. O'Donnell, and this is a guy, I took a performance class with, a television performance class with him, and it's a true story. He said, Mr. Roker, you have the perfect face for radio. So I wouldn't pursue on-air work on TV. But the local CBS station, where he worked as Mr. Trolley on the Magic Toy Shop, was looking, this was 1974, and they, at the time, would only do an 11 o'clock newscast on Saturday and Sunday. And the station decided they wanted to have a 6 and 11, and at the 11 o'clock they just had one person read news, sports, and weather. Now they wanted to have a full news team. And so the news director talked to Lou O'Donnell, and he said, listen, you got any kids up there that might be a weather person? And I had taken a couple of classes in meteorology just for a science requirement, but didn't plan on. The first class was ecology, and the other one was intro to meteorology, and I thought, why not? Anyway, so Doc, everybody called him Doc because he was Dr. Louis B. O'Donnell, so we all called him Doc O'Donnell. He came up, and he said, I want you to try out for this job, and he picked two other guys, too, to audition, and we made maps in the graphics arts department that with clear plastic on, so you could write on them. We had a U.S. map and a state map, and we each did an audition tape. He took it down, and Lou took it down, and the news director, a guy named Andy Brigham, he was also the investigative reporter. I kept calling him and calling him and calling him. And he finally said, "Kid, the only way I'm going to get you off my back is to just give you the job. You got the job, And it was a good thing because at the time there was an exchange program to study for a semester in England, in London, the BBC and all this, and all of my friends, my closest friends, were all going on this program, and I was going to go too, but there was a $500 deposit, and there was a certain cutoff date for you to get your money back, and 1974, well, hell, today $500 is $500, but in 1974, $500 was $500, and I still hadn't heard about the job, so I had to pull out of the program, and I was like, if I don't get this job, I'm just going to walk to the edge and literally jump into the lake. My life will be over. But I got the job, and I was making $10 a newscast. No, $15 a newscast. So I was making $60 a weekend, which to a college student you're thinking, hey, this is pretty good. It was about 40 miles from Syracuse to Oswego, 35, 40 miles. And then the oil embargo hit, and gas went from like 27 cents, 28 cents a gallon to like $1.20. It's like, the gas lines, all that. It was horrible. So I was almost losing money on the trip But it was a foot in the door, and I thought I'll just do this until a directing job comes up, and then I'll transition into that. And in fact, was making extra money during the week doing graphics. Because this was back in the day where you literally had an art department, although on a small station there was one guy, and he only worked from 9 to 5. So if they needed news graphics after that, there was nobody. So I would come, I'd get a list of graphics from the news director, and I'd make up graphics. I also directed commercial sessions. In that, back then, news footage was on film, but commercials were also on film at the same time. So they needed the film chains cleared or open to run news footage. So they would create and back then the videotape was on these big 2-inch reels, the massive 2-inch reels of tape. In fact, we had this one guy, Rosie, I think his name was. He was missing part of a finger because he tried to stop one of the reels. He had to change the tape, and So anyway, I would direct these sessions where we put all the commercials for the week's newscast onto these reels so that they could run the commercials and still run the news footage. Anyway, I got the job, and I did that for a year. And at the end of my junior year, the weekday weatherman was fired, and I got the weekday job. So I was going to school in my senior year and driving 5 days a week back and forth to Syracuse to do the 6 and 11 o'clock news. So I depended on the kindness of my professors, because there were many a day I was getting home, especially if there was a snowstorm or something like that. I was getting back really late, and that last semester I was kind of coasting to get through. And then, 6 months after I graduated, I got a job offer to go to Washington, D.C., which in a sense really changed my life because that's where I met Willard. So.
Well, going back to those early days on camera, I mean, you went from a face for radio to going on camera from the same professor. What was it about you that he saw that?
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, you feel, I don't know. I mean, I think there was I was, I guess, fairly facile at ad-libbing. I would, in radio, in the radio classes and stuff, and doing disc jockey work, I was pretty good at thinking on my feet. And I guess he thought that would hold me in good stead. But, who knows? I mean, it's, thank God he's put me up for it, but look, especially at that point, I think there was one other African American on the air in Syracuse, and in fact, the general manager was so nervous about it, he actually hired a security guard, and we were kind of like, well, what, are people going to storm the station? What, they didn't get any calls, nothing happened. It was just, here's Al Roker.
Can you talk about that time when people? Because I don't think some people would understand why that had to happen.
Well, it was this was where there was a push to get African Americans and minorities, on the air because it had been a white male bastion for such a long time. There weren't a lot of women, on TV. I mean, you had Barbara Walters and a few other, trailblazing women, but it was mostly a male dominated medium, especially not very many African Americans or Hispanics. I mean, I remember growing up. I mean, in New York, you had Geraldo Rivera, we had Bill McCreary, Bob Teague, real groundbreakers. Gil Noble at Channel 7. But but there weren't a lot of people. And in upstate New York, there were even fewer. So it was, in a sense, a big deal. But I think a lot of times management doesn't give the audience the credit that they deserve. That they're fine. Usually, they're kind of. I think the management tends to, especially back then, they were kind of layering their own insecurities projecting them onto the audience. Well, if I feel this way, the audience must feel this way. Now, by the same token, the general manager, the guy Larry Rhodes, did take a chance, and I think our station was much better had much better minority representation than and female representation than anybody else in the market, and I don't think it was inconsequential. I think there was a correlation between that and the fact, and we were number one. So they were able to make changes from a position of strength.
Was there any need for security? Were there any complaints, anything like that?
Nobody called, nobody complained. It was just a quiet Saturday night, in Syracuse, New York.
Were you comfortable on camera?
Look, I look back at those tapes and I go, whew, that was not pretty. But I don't think I'm ever necessarily comfortable. I'm always a little nervous, because you don't want to screw up, you don't want to mess up, you want to do a good job. I think I was okay, for somebody who'd never done television. I mean, I had this kind of quasi-afro and these mutton chops and, bad suit. I remember I didn't have a suit. I mean, literally my uniform was flannel shirts and overalls. And so I went to J.C. Penney, and it was a 4-piece suit combo for $29.99. There was not a natural fiber to be had within 5 miles of me. It was, because you got to remember, in '74, that was the age of the leisure suit, the polyester leisure suit. So that was, you got a jacket, a reversible vest, and 2 pair of pants. They said there was a possible combination of 80 different outfits. Wow.
And in terms of on-camera presence, did you picture an audience? Who were you talking to when you talked to the camera?
I never thought about it. I really didn't. I still don't. I mean, it's like, there's a camera and there's a person pointing to it. Talk. I don't really think about, who's on the other side, because it's such a wide variety of people. Or somebody say, well, pick one person and don't. Then you're kind of excluding everybody else. So I just kind of, I think it's more important to forget that you're on TV. You're just talking. Yeah, I mean, you kind of start by relating to an anchor person, and then you kind of segue into your weather. But that you're talking to another person. So I don't know if that answered that. But.
Good. And what about the weather part of it? How did you learn about meteorology?
Well,
and the weather?
like I said, I took a couple of classes, and then I started taking more, and I got my AMS seal of approval. And you learn as you go. I mean, you just, after a while, you see map situations set up, and you get kind of a gut feeling about what's going to happen. And so look, I mean, I started, like I said, in '74. So you just, by osmosis, you pick up enough information and a skill set. You're still going to blow a forecast. You're still going to screw up, but you hopefully screw up a lot less than you're right.
Where would you get your information?
From the National Weather Service. Now the way it works, you get it through a weather information provider. For example, we have a company called WSI, Weather Services International, that is part of the company that is owned by the Weather Channel, that, in full disclosure, NBC is a third owner in. And you get data, National Weather Service data, but you also get data from other meteorological organizations like European models and stuff like that. And by European models, I don't mean Giselle Bundchen, but other computer models, weather modeling. And there are private meteorologists in that company that give forecasts and interpret data. And so just about everybody, whether it's WSI or Weather Central or AccuWeather, there are a number of private companies that disseminate the government information, which you can also get directly, especially nowadays on the web. I mean, we used to have a teletype just like every, there was the AP, the UPI, Reuters, and there was a teletype room, and it was usually enclosed, and you'd open it up, and it was hot, and it was noisy, and it smelled like oil because you had to constantly oil the machines, and they were typewriters basically that were constantly spitting stuff, and there was also a National Weather Service wire as well. So you'd go in, and it was like, oh God, and you rip off your copy and come out.
Did you have to do your own maps too when you started?
Yeah, which I enjoyed doing. Back when I first started, there was a giant map that was painted over a piece of metal, and then you had magnetic symbols. I also have worked with maps that you drew on, but I was really excited when the computer generated graphics came in. I got my first weather computer in Cleveland. It was an Apple IIe computer, and that was 1979. It could display 16 colors, and you could loop 12 images for a satellite loop, and then you could also have like 4 or 5 like maps, weather maps, and then as computers grew, the ability to do graphics on computer and animation has just grown by leaps and bounds.
Let's talk about your move to Washington and how that changed your career.
About 6 months after I graduated, I got a job offer from WTTG in Washington, D.C. At the time, it was owned by Metro Media. They did the 10 o'clock news, one newscast a day. They also did an afternoon public affairs show called Panorama, and the host of the show was Maury Povich. And then he left, and Pat Mitchell took the job. In any event, I was kind of naive. I came in, the news director said, I flew in, and he said, well, look, we don't pay a lot. You'll make, we're offering $25,000 a year, but you'll be on the #1 newscast at 10 o'clock, and that'll be great for your career. And it wasn't until after I'd accepted the job, I moved there, and I realized they were the only newscast at 10 o'clock. Everybody else was on at 11, but, it was Washington, D.C. It was a big market. To be perfectly honest, I wasn't ready for a big market, but luckily, the station was a little less than, ready for prime time at that time. It had been a powerful station in the 60s, and then as technology had moved ahead, they hadn't kept up. And now today, WTTG is, as powerful as any of the owned station news departments. But we were, in fact, I guess it was maybe 3 or 4 weeks after I got there, there was that Hanafi Muslim takeover, and I barely knew the city, and Marion Barry had been shot, and the news director comes out in the newsroom and looks around, and there's nobody because everybody's out. But we don't have live trucks. We have to, at the time, everybody else had live trucks. We had to tape stuff and shuttle it back. And the news director came out. I was sitting at my desk. He goes, Roker, you're going to go to the hospital, DC hospital. You're going to go cover Marion Barry. I keep looking around thinking maybe miraculously there was another Roker behind me. And so I went and I did, but it was a weird, I'd done little feature stories, but I had never, done a shooting about a city councilman. So it was an odd feeling, but but we everybody got through it, and the greatest thing that happened while I was there was Willard, who was. You can't even imagine how big Willard was in Washington, D.C. at the time.
I think Willard Scott.
Willard Scott. That's how he didn't even go, when they would super his name, he wasn't even Willard Scott. It was just Willard ! Seriously. And one day I got this call, and I was like, "Hello!" It was about about 7 o'clock. Hey, who's this? And I said, "This is Al Roker. Who's this?" It's Willard. I'm out front. Why don't you come on? Well, let's go to dinner. And he just kind of called out of the blue, and we went to this Italian restaurant that was across the street from our station, Alfred's La Trattoria restaurant. And I mean, when you ate in Washington with Willard, it was like dining with the king. I mean, people were coming up, and women were kissing him on the head because when he got off the air, he made no pretensions about being bald. He wore the wig because they wanted him to. But as soon as he got off the air, he threw it on his desk, and he went out to dinner. And women were kissing him on his head, and it was just everybody knew Willard, and he really kind of took me under his wing, and really mentored me. I mean, I would say as a second dad. And he gave me the two best bits of advice I ever got, which was always be yourself, because at the end of the day, that's all you got. You can create a character and everything, but he said, I think, you just need to be yourself. And the other one was never give up your day job. He said, look, I mean, I love doing the Today Show, and, I love doing other projects, but, the Today Show is my bread and butter. And he says, and he goes, you stay on the train until you get off to the last stop, and even then you don't get off until the conductor tells you to get off. So I have taken both pieces of advice to heart.
Now he said to be yourself. In those early years, were you yourself on camera?
Yeah, you know what? I think in the beginning, until he told me that, I think I was kind of manic and trying to create a character, and it's a lot of work because you have to be somebody else. And then it was like, oh, that makes sense. It's a lot easier. So you don't have to force stuff. You don't have to, because it can become tiring having to be this person that maybe you're not, or that you are, but that you have ramped it up so that it's like you're always up here.
What kind of things were you doing?
Groundhog's Day, popped out of a manhole cover dressed as a groundhog. Just goofy stuff, and it was work, and probably not helpful in fostering credibility. So, I think you can have a good time, you can have fun as long as people feel it's genuine, and that's what he was saying.
What do you think he saw in you?
I think a younger version of him. I think, he did radio. In fact, he was one half of this comedy team, radio team called the Joy Boys, with his partner Ed Walker. They started WAMU, the American University radio station. Ed was born blind, and Willard has, they've always been best friends, and I think, I loved radio, and still do, but I think Willard saw, kind of a kindred spirit, I think.
How long were you in Washington?
2 years, from 1976 to 1978. Got there right before the inauguration of Jimmy Carter, and left in '78 to go to the NBC-owned operated station in Cleveland.
Did you think that, and how were you hired for that?
I had an agent, and the station in Cleveland was, they had hired a weather person and it wasn't working out, and they were desperate for, a weather person. And my contract had expired at WTTG, and my agent called and said they're desperate they really won't like you. It's almost, he said, this is about as close to a slam, he didn't use the term slam dunk. He said, there's a certainty they just want to meet with you, and you've got to see if you want to go there. But they're desperate. And he goes, well, when do I need to go? He said, yesterday. So that weekend flew to Cleveland and accepted the job that Tuesday. And 2 weeks later, I was in Cleveland, Ohio.
How did that compare to WTTG?
Well, different city. It was, in fact, it was still trying to shake off the Mistake by the Lake moniker. Dennis Kucinich had just been elected mayor. The city, in fact, my first day, I'm almost positive, my first day, the city went into bankruptcy. It was a tough time. The city was somewhat racially polarized. It was and the weather. I remember looking for houses, and one of the open houses I went to, the real estate agent said, "Oh, and this is Al Roker. He's going to be doing the weather at Channel 3." And the woman said, "Oh, I hope he's not one of those, quote, funny weathermen. This last weather guy thought he was funny, and he was anything but." I mean, oh boy, this could be a problem. This could be trouble. But I was there for 5 years, and I low-keyed it to begin with. I didn't just kind of let people get used to me, because Cleveland's an interesting market in that they really view you as an outsider for like the first 5 years almost. And the station in Cleveland had a lot of trouble because they had originally been owned by Group W, or they'd been owned by NBC. NBC wanted out of Cleveland, and they went to Group W, who owned a couple of NBC affiliates, and they said, either you swap stations with us in Philadelphia, or we're going to pull your NBC affiliate chips in your other markets. And at the time, nobody really wanted to be an ABC affiliate. So they said, okay, and then they sued them, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that NBC had to come back to Cleveland. And Clevelanders never forgot that. It was like the headline in the paper, Supreme Court forces NBC back to Cleveland. So the station really suffered, and it took a long time. It's now really a powerhouse station. But and toward the end of my tenure, we actually moved from third place to second. But it was a tough go.
What are some of the most important things you learned at that point in your career?
To just keep plugging away, to don't worry about where you are in a particular pecking order. Just do your best every day, and to enjoy yourself. In the beginning, it wasn't. Look, we were number 3, but we had a great esprit de corps. There was a great camaraderie among the staff. Anchors, reporters, camera people, crew. We'd get together on Friday nights, and I think that helped us. And I think that it was this slow, steady climb. But I think that's where I really appreciated, not just being in a job, but to savor what you're doing, to enjoy it, to enjoy the people you're with, and to really be thankful for what you've got.
Did you really feel at this point that this was your career?
Yeah, at that point, I thought, although I don't think I really hit my stride until 3 or 4 years into my tenure in Cleveland, because unlike Washington, I was only doing one newscast a night. It's kind of hard to get a rhythm, when you're doing. When I first got there was a 5 o'clock news, a 6, and an 11, and so that was the first time I was doing that many newscasts 5 days a week, and back there and in Cleveland, at 11 o'clock, weather got 3.5 minutes. Which was, wow. I remember coming home to New York City and watching Frank Field, and if he got a minute to a minute and a half at 11 o'clock, that was a lot. Whereas in Cleveland, the weather was a big deal, and so that was just a normal day to do 3.5 minutes, just to keep talking. Today it seems interminable, to listen to myself talk for 3.5 minutes. It's like, oh man, shut up. I think that's why I hit my stride.
Do people, just in general, do people blame the weatherman? Do you hear that?
Sure, it's hey, when are you going to clear it up? Most people, not most, almost everybody knows we don't have anything to do with it. But, everybody likes to have, a punching bag or somebody to blame. So, and I think people ascribe sometimes, even though they know intellectually it's not true, I think they sometimes ascribe to us powers that are more than what we have. We obviously don't control it, we don't change it, but it's always, hey, can't you do something about it? And I think secretly they wish we could. And I always say, if I could do that, I really wouldn't need this job.
Do people keep track of hits and misses?
No, but I think it's generally, you guys are always wrong. It's like, really, always wrong? Because if we were always wrong, I probably wouldn't have the job. it's like it's like when you're growing up, you can be doing pretty well in school, and you bring that F home, and that's all that sticks in your mother's mind. That F. Why didn't you study more? It's like, but I've been bringing home B's. Okay, I screwed up. I brought home an F. All right.
Would you ever reference it on your weather?
Oh, sure. Hey, we blew it today. I mean, here's why, and here's why. And kind of explain it. We didn't expect it to do this. We didn't expect this low pressure system to back up or retrograde. We were expecting this high pressure to kind of take over, and it didn't. So, I think you have to. I mean, A, to cover your butt, but B, to show people you're not afraid that you made a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. It's the way it works. And hey, guess what? I'm going to make another mistake.
In 1983, you moved to New York.
Yes. Yeah, I got my news director in Cleveland knew that there was a weekend weather job open here, and it had been open for 9 months. And she said, and I talked to her about it. She was not only just my news director, her name was Chris Ostrowski, and she was just terrific. And she said, look, as your boss, I don't think you should take that job because you're going to be in New York. It's a dog-eat-dog market. It's going to be tough and everything. As your friend, you should go for that job. And I will call Bob Davis, who is the news director, so he knows that when your agent calls, that I know that he's calling, and you should go for it. And so I came in, got the job. The general manager at our station in Cleveland was not as generous. His name was Neil Van Els, and he said, well, we'll let you out of your contract, even though it's NBC to NBC, but we'll let you out of your contract if we can find somebody before the end of the contract. And they obviously didn't try. So I got the job in April, and I think this is a testament to how desperate WNBC was. My contract didn't end until early December, and they held the job. So, and they brought in a few people. Ironically, a friend of mine who did weather in Cincinnati, a guy named Ira Joe Fisher, got interviewed for the job in Cleveland, but in the interim got a job offer from WABC in New York. And so he left and got a job in New York, and it was like, oh, great. Because Ira Joe is balding, funny, and chubby. I thought he's gonna steal my bit. I mean, I'm gonna be the bald, chubby weather guy who's funny. He's gonna get it first. But so I stayed till December, and then I finished like December 3rd or December 2nd, and started at WNBC on December 5th, 1983.
And how was it different for you?
Well, on the one hand, on the upside, I was home. My mom and dad could finally turn on the TV and see me. I had just gone through a difficult divorce, and was looking forward to a change, and moved to New York. And but on the other hand, it was kind of frightening because it's New York City, and nobody. It's the old, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. But for the most part, it was good. My family is here, and it was great because NBC was putting me up at the St. Regis Hotel, so I had 8 weeks on the company dole. That was great. But it was a time of anxiety because you're thinking, well, are people going to accept me? I'm going to be working with Frank Field, one of the legends of the industry. So it was a little nerve-wracking, but it was also very exciting. It was it's like it's New York City, because I remember being in Cleveland, and I subscribed to New York Magazine, and I would go every it would be in the mailbox on Monday, and I'd go to the mailbox and I'd open it up, and one day I remember going out, and there on the front cover of of New York Magazine. The banner was the hottest show on TV, and it was a picture of the cast of Live at 5. It was Sue Simmons, Jack Cafferty, Frank Field, Katie Kelly, Pia Lindstrom, Liz Smith, Chauncey Howell, and it was Sue Simmons, Jack Cafferty. It was one of these, it was just this show that was this juggernaut. There was nothing like it in local news across the country. This mix of news and information and celebrity. I mean, this was before E.T., before Access Hollywood, before all those shows, before TMZ. There was Live at 5, and you'd have Orson Welles one day, and Don Rickles the next day, and Sammy Davis Jr. and Johnny Mathis, and who's who was coming through New York. It became part of you had to stop at Live at 5. So, and I remember looking at that magazine and thinking, I will never be part of something this big. Wow. So, but I always remember my first day. I was supposed to go on the air that Saturday, and Frank Field, who had been working and hadn't had he didn't have a backup person because there was no weekend weather person. On that Thursday, that Friday morning, I was going to come in. I got a call from him, and he said, "So how you feeling?" I said, "I'm good. I feel good." He goes, "You feel ready?" I said, "Yeah, I feel ready." He goes, "Good. You're working for me tonight." Oh, I don't know. Don't worry about it. Just go in and tell them. It'll be fine. So, yeah, I went in. I said to the 5 o'clock producer, this woman Sue Levine. I said, "I'm doing the weather today." He goes, "Where's Frank?" I said, "Off." And she let loose this string of expletives. Nobody ever told her anything. Oh, great. And the announcer for Live at 5 was Don Pardo, and he would do it live. And he was on camera. It would start on camera on him, and so from WNBC TV, New York, this is, and it would start to pull out, and you'd see the whole news set, and he would go through the cast. And so it was my first day, and it was Live at 5 with Jack Cafferty, Sue Simmons, and Al Roker with the weather. And afterwards, I went up to him and I said, "Mr. Pardo, I'm such a fan, and it's a really big thrill to hear you say my name." And he goes, "I know, I punched it for you." It's like, I'm in New York.
And after that, it was smooth sailing for you?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, then 6 months afterwards, Frank Field got into a contract dispute with Channel 4 and left. And I got the job. And I've only been here 6 months. And the general consensus is you never want to follow a legend. You want somebody else to follow the legend. They'll take the flak. They'll get fired. Then you can come in. Now, I was going to be the chump that was going to follow the legend. And from whatever reason it worked. But I was petrified. In fact, Jack Cafferty, who was a bit of a curmudgeon, they were going to announce it at this, back in the day, local stations had these big fall premiere parties and, invite all the clients and, nonstop booze and food. And ours was going to be at the New York Hilton, and we had to share a car, he and I. And just before we get out, and they were going to announce me at this, that I was going to get the job. And Jack says, just before he gets out of the car, he goes, "Well, young man, I don't envy you." I said, "Why?" He said, "I would hate to be the man who follows Dr. Frank Field. Good luck." I was petrified at that point. This is just Jack fooling around. But I didn't know that he was fooling around, so I was like, oh, God. But it worked out okay.
Did you feel any kind of backlash or anything like that?
No. It was, well, the good news is I'd already been there, and Frank Field had started taking a lot of time off. So, people, were used to me already. So it wasn't like, and he left them. He left, in a sense, he left the viewers. He left to go to Channel 2. So it wasn't like WNBC fired him. He left. He said, "I quit you." This was before Brokeback Mountain. So, luckily, I don't think people blamed me. It wasn't like they fired poor Dr. Frank Fields and brought this young whippersnapper in, And it wasn't like they were bringing in some young, good-looking hotshot, It was a bald, chubby black kid, So, it wasn't. It worked. It was okay on a number of levels. Can we just take a quick break? I have to.